I sat there in the amber glow of the restaurant, my daughter's laughter fading behind her husband's smug grin. "Must be nice, not having a real job anymore," he'd said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. The silverware trembled in my hand, but I smiled instead. After 40 years of building an empire from sleepless nights and sacrifice, my son-in-law mistook silence for surrender. He didn't know I wasn't done working. I was just done warning. "We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from." It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The restaurant glowed with soft amber light, the kind designed to flatter faces and hide tension. Linda Connors sat at one end of the polished oak table, her posture straight, despite the ache in her lower back. Around her, the conversation at the family dinner flowed easily, her daughter Emily chatting about a new yoga studio, her son-in-law Brad bragging about a client deal he'd supposedly landed, and his two friends, Travis and Eli, laughing a little too loudly at everything he said. It was a Friday night in uptown Dallas, the kind of place where the valet knew you by name, and the menus didn't bother listing prices. Linda lifted her glass of sparkling water, watching the tiny bubbles rise and break. She had been quiet for most of the evening, content to listen and observe. That was how she'd built an entire company, by letting men talk first. Brad, handsome and animated in a fitted navy jacket, had been talking almost nonstop since they sat down. He loved an audience, especially one that let him perform his confidence like theater. Then, somewhere between the salad course and the main, he turned toward her with a grin that was too polished to be harmless. "Must be nice," he said, his tone light but his eyes glinting. "Not having a real job anymore." The table went quiet for a beat, one of those silences that hums with tension before the laughter arrives. Travis barked out a laugh, too loud, and clapped Brad on the back. Eli smirked, shaking his head like Brad had just scored a point in some invisible contest. Emily froze, her fork still hovering over her plate. She glanced at her husband, then at her mother, her face caught between apology and disbelief. Linda's lips curved, just slightly, though it wasn't a smile. She tilted her glass toward the center of the table and took another slow sip. "A real job," she repeated softly, her tone unreadable. The carbonation stung her throat. She could feel the faint pulse in her temple, the familiar one that used to hit just before a big board meeting when someone underestimated her. Brad chuckled, encouraged by his friend's reaction. "I mean, don't get me wrong. It's amazing that you built the company and all," he said, gesturing with his drink. "But it's different now, right? You're more of a figurehead." He grinned, leaning back in his chair. "Some of us still have to earn our keep." Emily reached under the table and touched his arm. "Brad," she murmured, warning in her voice. He laughed again, brushing her off. "I'm kidding," he said. "You know I love Mom's legacy. I'm just saying it must be nice not having to grind every day." The word grind landed like grit between Linda's teeth. She remembered the late nights she'd spent in windowless conference rooms, negotiating contracts while Brad was still in college. She remembered the years she'd gone without sleep, the months of payroll anxiety, the constant battle to be taken seriously as a woman in tech before anyone wanted to hear her ideas. And now, across the table, her son-in-law, the man she'd brought into her company out of love for her daughter, sat there, smirking, drunk on self-importance. She set her glass down gently, aligning it with the edge of her placemat. "You're right," she said, her voice calm and even. "It must be nice." Brad blinked, the grin faltering just enough for her to see the insecurity beneath it. The moment passed, smoothed over by another forced laugh from Travis. "She's sharp," Travis said, trying to diffuse the tension. "I told you, Brad, never go toe-to-toe with your mother-in-law." The waiter appeared to refill drinks, sensing none of the undercurrent. Linda declined with a polite smile, folding her napkin neatly beside her plate. The conversation shifted awkwardly to something about the Cowboys' game that weekend. Emily tried to pick up the thread, her voice a little too bright. But the rhythm of the evening had changed. The laughter was thinner now, the energy strained. Linda sat back, her expression serene, her mind working in quiet, deliberate motion. She'd spent her career reading people, clients, investors, competitors, and she knew exactly what she'd just seen. Brad didn't mock her out of humor. He mocked her because he needed to believe her power was gone. Across the table, Brad raised his glass again, forcing one last toast. To hard work, he said, with that same self-satisfied grin. Linda met his eyes and smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. To knowing the difference, she replied. Her tone was light, but Brad's smile wavered again. Emily's gaze flicked between them, uneasy. The rest of the dinner passed in fragments of chatter and shallow laughter, but Linda barely heard a word. By the time dessert arrived, she'd already made a quiet, precise decision, one that would start Monday morning. Monday morning unfolded beneath a clear Texas sky, the kind that made the glass of downtown Dallas shimmer like polished chrome. Inside the 21st floor of Connors Consulting, the hum of keyboards and the faint aroma of roasted coffee signaled another start to another work week. Brad Coleman strode through the lobby with a swagger that bordered on theatrical, his charcoal suit crisp, his cologne heavy, his grin sharp enough to draw blood. He tapped his access card against the reader and turned to his buddy Eli, who followed 2 steps behind like a shadow. She won't be around much, Brad said, lowering his voice just enough for it to sound conspiratorial. Watch and see. She's more about board luncheons and ribbon cuttings these days. Eli laughed under his breath, adjusting his lanyard. Then I guess we're running this place, huh? Exactly, Brad replied, glancing at his reflection in the glass wall. Deshaun may technically be COO, but he's scared of rocking boats. And Rhonda? She still acts like it's 1998. This place needs people who think bigger. He buttoned his jacket and flashed a self-satisfied smile. We're the future. A receptionist greeted him. Morning, Mr. Coleman. But he barely nodded in return. He walked past her toward the elevator, leaving the scent of expensive aftershave in his wake. The doors closed behind him, sealing in the arrogance like trapped air. Upstairs, the atmosphere in Linda's home office was quieter but charged in its own way. She sat at her desk, a solid walnut slab facing a wide window overlooking her backyard, where sunlight spilled across neat stacks of paper. Her fingers moved steadily over the keyboard, the rhythmic sound of typing like a soft heartbeat against the silence. She hadn't slept well after Friday's dinner. Brad's words had replayed in her mind, not because they'd hurt, but because they'd confirmed something she'd long suspected. He thought her power was ornamental. He believed she'd aged out of consequence. That assumption she knew could be fatal for him. She opened her laptop, logged into the company's internal audit system, and waited as the dashboard loaded. Her name still appeared at the top of the access hierarchy, founder and chair, Connors Consulting Group. Brad might have forgotten that her signature wasn't ceremonial. It was binding. The numbers filled the screen. Charts, expenses, and red flags blinking like quiet alarms. One department in particular caught her attention. Strategic partnerships and vendor relations. Brad's department. The budget line was bloated. Too much spending. Too little return. She clicked deeper, following the trail of invoices that should have been routine but weren't. Contracted vendors with no clear deliverables, consulting fees that looked suspiciously padded, travel expenses coded vaguely as client entertainment. A slow exhale escaped her lips. The cursor hovered over a transaction labeled Travis Mayfield Consulting, $14,800. She clicked it open, scanning the document. No signed approval, no invoice detail. Just Brad's digital signature, sloppy and overconfident. A soft ping interrupted her focus. It was an email from Deshaun Lee, subject line, "You should see this." Linda opened the attachment. A neatly formatted spreadsheet appeared, time-stamped and color-coded, tracking performance outputs versus budget consumption. Deshaun didn't editorialize, he never did, but the data spoke for itself. Brad's department was burning money with no measurable ROI. Below the main grid, a single line note from Deshaun read, "Pulled these before the next quarterly. Figured you'd want to look before things go public." Linda smiled faintly. Deshaun had always understood her. Quiet loyalty paired with strategic foresight. She typed a short reply. "Keep this between us for now. We'll handle it discreetly." Another ping. This time from Rhonda Vega in HR. The subject line was shorter, but the weight behind it landed differently. Reminder. "You're still chair." Linda opened it, scanning the brief message. "Per the bylaws, your authority remains intact. If you wish to initiate an internal review, your signature alone holds." For a moment, she simply stared at the screen, her reflection ghosting over the company logo. Brad's laughter from that dinner seemed to echo faintly in her memory. Must be nice not having a real job. She rested her hand on the mouse, then on the arm of her chair, feeling the smooth leather under her fingertips. She didn't feel angry. Not yet. She felt something colder, cleaner, a sense of precision she hadn't summoned in years, the kind that came from seeing the battlefield clearly for the first time. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Emily. "Mom, can we talk tonight? Brad's just stressed. Please don't take Friday personally." Linda stared at it for a long moment before locking the screen without replying. Outside, the wind moved through the live oaks, stirring the shadows against her window. Inside, she clicked Export Report, watched the file save to her desktop, and named it simply, "Budget Review, Confidential." Then she leaned back, folded her arms and smiled to herself. Not with satisfaction, but with quiet recognition. It had taken him less than 72 hours to prove exactly why she'd never truly stepped away. Tuesday arrived with the sharp, glassy brightness only Dallas could manage, a sun too harsh to ignore, a skyline too ambitious to rest. Inside Connors Consulting's high-rise, the office buzzed with ordinary motion, phones ringing, the low murmur of analysts, the faint hum of printers in the distance. To most employees, it was just another day. But to Linda Connors, seated in her downtown office for the first time in months, it was the beginning of an audit disguised as routine. Her name still gleamed on the frosted glass door, Linda M. Connors, founder and chair. The cleaning crew had kept the brass lettering spotless. She ran her fingers lightly over it before stepping inside. Her desk had been cleared, as if no one expected her to return, but she didn't mind. She wasn't here to make herself comfortable. She was here to take back control. By 8 a.m., her assistant had sent out calendar, invites to every executive, labeling them simply quarterly check-ins, 30 minutes each. No fanfare, no context, just her name on the invite. She knew the subtle unease that would ripple through the building the moment it landed in inboxes. She wanted that unease. Down on the 18th floor, Brad saw the notification pop up while joking with Eli over coffee. He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "You have got to be kidding me," he said, turning his laptop around so Eli could see. "Look who suddenly wants to play boss again." Eli leaned closer, reading the subject line. "She's doing meetings?" He grinned, half amused, half nervous. "Yeah," Brad said, typing fast. He hit forward and sent it straight to Emily with a short message. "LOL. Look who wants a meeting." A few seconds later, he added another to Eli. "Don't sweat it. She'll cancel or forget." Then, with that false confidence only arrogance can sustain, he closed his laptop and sauntered toward his office, tossing his empty coffee cup into the trash without looking. By mid-morning, the first meeting began. The conference room overlooked Clyde Warren Park, a sea of green interrupted by traffic noise. But inside, the air felt unusually still. Linda sat at the head of the long walnut table, laptop open, reading glasses perched low on her nose. Her posture radiated ease, but her eyes tracked every movement in the room. Deshaun Lee was the first to arrive. As always, he came prepared. A notebook, 2 pens, a quiet nod. "Good morning, Linda," he said, settling into the seat nearest the corner. "Morning, Deshaun," she replied, offering a measured smile. One by one, the other department heads trickled in: finance, HR, operations. Brad's seat remained empty. She noticed, but didn't comment. When she began speaking, her tone was even, precise. "I want to hear how we're operating, what's working, what isn't. Think of this as alignment, not interrogation." Her phrasing was deliberate. No one spoke for a moment. Then, gently, Deshaun broke the silence, offering updates from operations, staff retention, project margins, team morale. He kept his words factual, his eyes on the notes. The rest followed his lead, cautious but cooperative. Halfway through, the door cracked open. Eli slipped in, 17 minutes late, the faint smell of cheap beer chasing him like a shadow. His tie was loose, his eyes slightly unfocused. "Sorry," he muttered, avoiding Linda's gaze. "Traffic." She said nothing. Her eyes drifted briefly to the clock, then back to her screen. Deshaun's pen didn't pause. When she asked about his department's progress, Eli stammered something about expanding vendor outreach and cross-functional synergy. The buzzwords landed flat. Linda let him talk until he ran out of them. Then quietly, she said, "Thank you, Eli," and moved on. The room stayed silent for 3 long beats before anyone else dared to speak. Travis never showed up. His assistant emailed 10 minutes after the meeting ended. "Apologies. Travis had an urgent client call." Linda forwarded it to HR with a one-line note: "Please verify." By the end of the day, she'd met with every executive except the 3 men who needed it most. But she wasn't angry. She'd expected resistance. She'd planned for it. What she hadn't expected was how natural it felt to be back. How the rhythm of decision-making, the silent power of observation, came rushing to her like muscle memory. As the last of the daylight faded against the city glass, Deshaun lingered by the doorway. "You're setting the table," he said quietly, not as a question. Linda closed her laptop, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "Always start with the table," she said. When he left, she turned toward the window, watching the skyline flicker to life in shades of gold and blue. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Emily, unread. She ignored it, eyes fixed on the reflection of the empty chair across from her. By Wednesday morning, the office felt different. Quieter, though no one could have said why. The hallways of Connors Consulting still carried the same hum of muted conversation, but it lacked its usual confidence. Whispers followed Linda now when she walked through the executive wing, a living reminder that power, once thought dormant, was awake again. She didn't stop to acknowledge anyone. Her focus was locked on the glass-walled HR suite at the end of the corridor. Inside, the blinds were drawn halfway, a rarity for Rhonda Vega, who preferred transparency even when it was uncomfortable. Linda tapped twice on the door and stepped in. Rhonda looked up from her desk, glasses low on her nose, a half-empty mug of coffee steaming beside a neat row of color-coded binders. She'd been with the company since its earliest days, back when the office had fit inside a single rented floor and every employee knew each other's birthdays. Her loyalty wasn't loud, but it was carved deep. "Morning," Linda said. "Morning, Chairwoman." Rhonda's tone was even, but her eyes flicked upward, searching. You here for what I think you're here for? Let's find out, Linda replied, sliding her laptop onto the table between them. Pull the hiring records for vendor relations. All positions created in the last 3 years. Let's start there. Rhonda's fingers moved with practiced precision over the keyboard. Within seconds, the HR database bloomed open across 2 screens. Dozens of files populated, a list of names, dates, and titles that looked ordinary at first glance, but patterns began to emerge the longer they scrolled. No job postings, Linda murmured, scanning the entries. No internal memos, no external listings, just direct hires. Rhonda frowned. That's not protocol. Every role, even contract-based, has to have a posting ID and candidate log. Otherwise, it's untraceable, Linda finished for her. Rhonda clicked open one of the folders labeled Travis Mayfield, Director, Strategic Partnerships. The onboarding packet was thin, no offer letter timestamp, no background check clearance, and most notably, no second signature. Only Brad's name filled the approval line, his digital initials scrawled in lazy blue. Where's the compliance audit? Linda asked. There isn't one, Rhonda said quietly. These never went through compliance. She paused, tapping her pen against her notepad. Eli's file is the same. So is Jason Dyer's. Remember him? The guy who kept showing up late to client calls? Linda nodded slowly. He was one of Brad's referrals, wasn't he? Every single one of them, Rhonda confirmed, scrolling down. All hired under discretionary authority, but the clause he's citing only applies to temporary contractors. These are full-time employees, high salaries too. Linda leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing at the screen. The deeper they went, the messier it got. Missing tax forms, mismatched start dates, incomplete W-2s. Some documents bore signatures that didn't quite match. A few were obviously photocopied. It was the kind of sloppiness that didn't happen by accident. It happened because someone assumed no one would ever look. Rhonda exhaled, sitting back. You know what this means if we report it, right? It's not just internal policy. These are federal filing issues. If legal gets involved, they will, Linda said, cutting in gently but firmly. Once we've verified every file. She reached across and began highlighting key entries on her screen. The motions were calm, deliberate, but there was something sharp behind them, like a scalpel tracing an incision line. Each click, each highlight, was another quiet revelation of how much rot had set in beneath Brad's charm. Rhonda watched her for a moment, then said softly, You sure about this, Linda? You start this process. It won't stay quiet for long. He's your son-in-law. Linda didn't look up. Her voice, when it came, was cool and steady. He's also an employee, and I built this company on the belief that no one is above the rules, not even me. For a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the overhead vent. Then Linda pushed back her chair and stood, reaching for the nearest file folder. Print everything, she said. Every document, every email chain, then lock your door when you're done. Rhonda hesitated. Lock it? Linda met her gaze, eyes calm but unyielding. Yes, we're not ready for anyone to know what's coming. Rhonda nodded, swallowing hard. Understood. She began hitting print one file at a time, the faint churn of the printer filling the space like a heartbeat. Linda gathered her laptop and slid it into her bag. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door, watching the papers slide out one after another, evidence piling up like snowdrifts. Outside the HR office, the corridor gleamed under the fluorescent lights, silent and sterile. Linda walked past a few employees who greeted her politely, unaware that the foundation beneath their confident chatter was already starting to shift. She reached the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. The metallic doors reflected her faintly, composed, patient, already 2 steps ahead. By Thursday morning, the tension inside Connor's Consulting had developed its own gravity, an invisible pull that everyone felt but no one named. Conversations dimmed when Linda passed. Even the elevators seemed to hum more quietly. She wasn't the kind of leader who stormed through hallways or raised her voice. Her power came from silence, the kind that made people wonder what she already knew. In her office, the blinds were drawn halfway against the glare of the Dallas sun. On her desk, a thick stack of printed documents sat in precise alignment, paper clipped by department. The top sheet bore a single title: Vendor Relations, Compliance Review. Deshawn entered without knocking, a habit she'd long allowed him. He carried a tablet tucked under his arm and a look that hovered between grim and impressed. "You're going to want to see this," he said, pulling up a folder on his screen. Linda motioned for him to sit. "Walk me through it." He placed the tablet between them, swiping open a contract stamped with the company's watermark. "This one's for a vendor named Apex Consulting Partners," he said. "Supposedly hired to develop CRM integration for one of Brad's accounts. Signed 6 months ago." Linda scanned the contract quickly, her eyes sharp. "And? There's no record of Apex in our system," Deshawn continued. "No payments processed, no deliverables logged, no vendor tax ID." She frowned slightly. "Could be a ghost vendor. We've seen those before." "Could be," he said. "Except I found another contract. Identical formatting. Different name. Metro Dynamics, LLC. Same address, different tax ID. Both signed by Brad." He zoomed in on the signature block, highlighting the scrawled electronic mark. "Look closely. The metadata timestamps are off. His approval signature predates the creation of the actual document by 3 days." Linda's jaw tightened. "He forged them." Deshawn nodded slowly. "It looks that way, and both contracts list Travis Mayfield as project liaison." She exhaled through her nose, steady but cold. "Kickback?" "That's what it smells like," he replied. "Travis created the shell companies, Brad approved the fake vendor payments, and they probably split the funds. I'll need more time to trace where the money went." Linda's eyes shifted toward the window, where the sunlight fractured across the skyline. For a long moment, she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her tone was clinical. "We don't need time. We need evidence." Deshawn nodded once, then hesitated. "There's more." He reached into his bag and pulled out a printed log report. "Eli's work laptop. IT flagged inactivity." Linda scanned the page. Every date showed the same thing: empty logs, no client correspondence, no project files, no internal submissions, for 6 straight weeks. "He hasn't done a single thing," she said quietly. "No," Deshawn replied, "but he's been billing 40 hours a week." Linda let out a small, almost disbelieving laugh. "They didn't even try to hide it." "That's what makes it dangerous," Deshawn said. "People who stop pretending think they're untouchable." Linda leaned back in her chair, fingertips pressed together. The office was still except for the faint hum of the air vent. Across her desk, the city reflected in the glass, brilliant, indifferent, built on the kind of ambition she once admired. Brad had taken that ambition and twisted it into something small, vulgar. Without another word, she pulled a fresh folder from the drawer and began labeling it with slow precision. Terminations. Pending. The pen moved with deliberate control. Deshawn watched her for a moment. "You're really doing this?" "I'm documenting what already exists," she replied. "They did this to themselves." She opened the first page and began assembling the evidence: printouts, audit trails, compliance violations, expense summaries. She arranged them not by department but by culpability, creating a silent map of betrayal. Each tab was a name, each page a wound she intended to cauterize. When she was done, she slid the folder across her desk toward Deshawn. "Take this to legal. ask for a confidential consult under Section 12 of our bylaws. I'll meet them in 30 minutes. Deshawn hesitated. Linda, once this starts, there's no walking it back. The board will hear. The family will hear. Her gaze didn't waver. Then let them. The only people who should be nervous are the ones who built their careers on lies. He nodded, stood, and left without another word. Linda sat alone for a moment, the weight of quiet pressing around her. She didn't feel vindicated, just steady. The kind of steady that came from knowing the next move was inevitable. Her phone buzzed. A new text flashed from Emily. Brad says you're digging into his department. Is that true? Linda stared at it until the screen dimmed, then turned her phone face down. A knock came at the door. Rhonda this time holding a manila envelope close to her chest. Legal's ready for you, she said. They've already asked for payroll access and system credentials. They're taking this seriously. Linda stood, straightened her blazer, and picked up the terminations, pending folder. Good, she said. So am I. Together they walked down the hall, their footsteps echoing in tandem against the marble floor. Every few seconds, an employee passed by and nodded, unaware of the quiet storm forming just behind the conference room doors. The boardroom on the 21st floor had always been a place of ceremony. Its cheap, polished walnut table stretched beneath pendant lights, the glass walls overlooking the Dallas skyline like a stage backdrop for ambition. By mid-morning Thursday, the air inside that room was different, colder, quieter, charged with something that hummed just beneath the veneer of calm. Linda Connors sat at the head of the table, posture straight, expression unreadable. Her blazer was immaculate, her hands folded neatly over the folder before her, the same one she'd labeled terminations, pending. To her right sat Rhonda Vega, HR director, her pen poised above a legal pad. To her left, a young attorney from legal affairs arranged his files in precise stacks, his jaw set. The door opened. Brad Coleman entered first, his smirk preceding him like perfume. He wore confidence like armor, crisp shirt unbuttoned just enough to look casual, voice already halfway to a joke. Morning, everyone, he said, glancing around. Didn't know we were having such a full house. Something I should know? He dropped into the chair opposite Linda, spreading his hands as if presiding over a friendly chat instead of a hearing. Behind him, Travis and Eli shuffled in, less certain, eyes darting between faces. Travis cracked his knuckles, trying to appear relaxed. Eli smelled faintly of cologne and nerves. Linda met none of their gazes. She opened the folder slowly, the sound of the metal clasp snapping loose echoing in the silence. Let's begin, she said. Brad laughed lightly. Sure. Is this about the restructuring proposal I sent last week? I told Deshawn we could talk through. This isn't about proposals, Linda interrupted. Her tone wasn't sharp, but it stopped him mid-sentence. She glanced at Rhonda. Please record the meeting for documentation. Rhonda clicked the recorder on, the red light blinking to life. Linda turned the first page of her file. Brad Coleman, Travis Mayfield, Eli Rogers. This meeting has been called to review matters of performance, compliance, and conduct related to vendor relations and strategic partnerships. You are entitled to HR representation and legal counsel. You have both present. Brad's grin stiffened. Okay, now you're making this sound serious. It is, Linda said simply. She handed a set of printed documents across the table. These are copies of internal audits conducted this week. They include falsified vendor contracts, unverified payments, and missing compliance records, all under your department's oversight. Brad flipped through the pages, a flicker of color rising in his neck. This is ridiculous. Those contracts were approved through standard channels. They weren't, Linda said, turning another page. The signatures on both contracts were digitally forged. The metadata confirms it. Travis shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Wait, what contracts? Linda's gaze lifted to him, calm but cutting. Apex Consulting Partners and Metro, Dynamics. Both list you as liaison. Both are shell entities. Both trace back to a business account you registered under your own name. Travis's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked to Brad, who glared at him, a silent warning written across his face. Eli cleared his throat. I don't know anything about that. I just handle outreach. Linda cut him off without raising her voice. Outreach? According to IT, your work laptop hasn't logged a single client interaction in 6 weeks, yet your timesheets reflect full billable hours. Eli's face drained of color. He slumped back, the pretense gone. The attorney beside Linda slid another document forward. Per company policy, falsifying records and misappropriating funds constitute grounds for immediate termination pending investigation, he said. His tone was calm, practiced. Brad leaned forward, his voice sharp now. You don't have the authority to do this without board approval. Linda's reply was soft, but lethal. You might want to reread the bylaws. Section 12, Chair Authority for Ethical Breach Intervention. She let the words hang, eyes steady. You should have read what you signed when you took the job. The silence that followed was heavy enough to feel. Rhonda's pen scratched faintly as she wrote notes. Then, at Linda's nod, she slid 3 pre-printed termination packets across the table, one for each of them. You'll each be placed on administrative leave effective immediately, Rhonda said. Security will escort you once we finish. Brad stared at the folder as though it might vanish if he glared hard enough. You're doing this because you don't like me, he said finally, voice rising. Because I married your daughter. Linda didn't flinch. No, she said quietly. I'm doing this because you embarrassed my company. My daughter just made the mistake of marrying you. For the first time, Brad's bravado cracked. His lips parted to argue, but the words faltered. Travis sat motionless, eyes glassy. Eli pressed his palms together, muttering something under his breath. By 10:30 a.m., the paperwork was signed. HR finalized the forms, legal countersigned, and security waited just outside the glass doors. Travis left first, shoulders slumped. Eli followed, silent. Brad lingered at the threshold, turning once toward Linda. You think this makes you a hero? He asked bitterly. Linda looked up, her voice almost gentle. No, but it makes me right. He stared at her for a long moment, jaw tight, then turned and walked out, the door closing behind him with a soft hydraulic hiss. Linda remained still for several seconds, the quiet pressing in around her like a seal. She finally closed the terminations, pending folder and exhaled once through her nose. Rhonda gathered her notes, hesitating before speaking. That went cleaner than I expected. Linda gave a faint smile. It's only clean until the blood hits the balance sheets. The conference room was empty now, the air still faintly echoing with the aftershocks of what had happened. Papers lay scattered where security had gathered them, chairs slightly askew, as though the room itself were catching its breath. Outside the glass wall, downtown Dallas glittered with its usual confidence, indifferent to the quiet ruin of reputations. Linda sat alone at the table, her back to the skyline. The folder labeled Terminations. Pending was gone, handed off to legal for final processing. In front of her now lay a different document, thicker, older, the pages worn soft at the edges. The partnership agreement. She ran a hand over it once, feeling the raised company seal beneath her fingertips. It was the contract Brad had signed 3 years ago, when she'd reluctantly agreed to bring him in at Emily's urging. She'd told herself it was temporary, an act of faith in her daughter's marriage. Instead, it had been an open door for arrogance. The door creaked open behind her. Brad stepped in, escorted by security but unrestrained. His confidence was gone. In its place was something brittle and angry. He looked smaller without the bravado, like a man stripped of costume. "You can't do this," he said, his voice low, hoarse from shouting earlier. "You're making a mistake that's going to tear this family apart." Linda turned the chair slightly to face him, calm as a surgeon. "Sit down." He hesitated, but when the guard stepped aside, he obeyed. She slid the partnership agreement across the table. The papers made a soft, deliberate sound against the polished wood. "You should reread Section 14, she said. "It's highlighted." He scanned the text, his brow furrowing. His lips moved silently as he read the clause aloud. "The chair retains sole authority to terminate any employee, partner, or officer, with or without cause, if deemed in the company's best interest." His eyes flicked up. "You added this after I joined." "No," Linda said evenly. "You signed it without reading. You were too busy telling the notary how brilliant you were." His jaw flexed. "You're enjoying this." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp enough to cut through the pretense. "Don't flatter yourself, Brad. This isn't pleasure. This is policy." Brad's eyes darted to the paper, then back to her. "You could have handled this privately. You didn't have to humiliate me in front of everyone." "I didn't humiliate you," Linda replied. "You did that yourself. When you lied, when you stole, and when you mocked the people who made you possible." The silence between them thickened. Outside, faint traffic noise filtered through the glass. Brad's hand trembled as he picked up the exit form Rhonda had left on the table. His voice was barely audible. "Emily's not going to forgive you for this?" Linda's expression didn't change. "She'll learn," she said softly. He looked down at the document, pen poised. "You really want this? You want your own daughter's husband unemployed? Destroyed?" "I want my company clean," she said. "And I want my daughter to remember the difference between a partner and a parasite." Brad stared at her, his eyes bloodshot, something desperate flickering there. Anger, shame, maybe even fear. Then, slowly, he signed. The pen scratched across the paper, uneven and final. When he finished, Linda gathered the form and closed the folder with quiet precision. "You'll receive your final check after the audit clears," she said. "Your access has already been revoked." Brad pushed back from the table, his chair scraping harshly against the tile. "You're a cold woman," he said, voice shaking. "You know that? You're not protecting Emily, you're punishing her." Linda looked at him for a long moment, then spoke so quietly it forced him to stop moving. "I protected her the day I stopped letting you represent this family." The door opened again. This time Emily's voice cut through the tension like glass on stone. "Mom, what did you do?" She was out of breath, cheeks flushed from the elevator dash. Her eyes darted to Brad, then to the signed papers in Linda's hands. "You fired him?" she said, disbelief breaking into panic. Linda stayed seated. "He fired himself," she said gently. Emily turned on her husband. "Brad, please, tell me this isn't real." He didn't answer. His silence was an admission, and the tears in Emily's eyes hardened into something heavier. She looked back at her mother, voice trembling. "You're breaking our marriage." Linda rose slowly, gathering the folder under her arm. "No," she said, her tone soft but absolute. "He broke your standards. I'm just reminding you where they were." For a long moment neither woman moved. The hum of the city filled the space between them. Brad stood frozen, face turned toward the floor, as if shame had anchored him there. Linda stepped past him, hand briefly grazing Emily's shoulder, a fleeting, wordless touch that held both apology and resolve. Then she walked out, her heels clicking steadily down the hall, each step a quiet declaration of ownership. Friday morning came in hushed tones. The storm had already broken, the firings, the confrontation, the fallout. And yet the air inside Connors Consulting still carried the static of what lingered. Rumors bloomed quietly across departments. No one spoke Brad's name above a whisper, but everyone knew. Linda Connors arrived early anyway, her silver sedan gliding into the parking structure before sunrise, her reflection a brief ghost in the tinted glass. When she stepped into her office, the city below was still half asleep, its skyline blurred in a pale wash of morning light. On her desk, a brown envelope waited. Deshawn's handwriting stretched neatly across the front. Side hustles. She set her bag down, tore the seal, and opened it. Inside were printed screenshots, email threads, and a small USB drive clipped to a note. Couldn't believe this one. Thought you'd want to see for yourself. Linda slid the drive into her laptop. The files opened one by one, each one worse than the last. The first was a presentation deck, branded under a company she didn't recognize. Coinspire, complete with a slick logo and a tagline that made her stomach turn. Reimagining trust through crypto innovation. Brad's name sat proudly at the top of the slide deck, Chief Visionary Officer. She clicked through the slides, her disbelief hardening into something colder. Brad had been using Connors Consulting's proprietary data, their client demographics, vendor networks, even partial budget templates, to pitch a cryptocurrency app to outside investors. She checked the timestamps. Half of the pitches had been made during regular business hours. The calendar invites, copied from his company account, confirmed it. He'd used company time, company assets, and company contacts. The audacity was staggering. Her lips curved, not quite a smile, but something sharper. "You wanted a side hustle, Brad," she murmured to the empty office. "You just turned it into evidence." She scrolled further. The next document was a time report from payroll, a detailed breakdown of hours logged for each team member in vendor relations. Travis's name appeared near the top. He had billed 42 hours over the previous month for client acquisition projects. There were no corresponding projects on record. No clients. No deliverables. Linda cross-checked the names of the supposed clients listed beside each entry. All three were non-existent. He'd created fake accounts to pad his hours. She felt a slow, simmering disgust settle into her chest. They hadn't just stolen money. They'd mocked the integrity of the system she'd built to protect the people who worked honestly. The last file was almost absurd. A screenshot of Eli's LinkedIn page, captured by Deshawn at 2:13 a.m. the night before. The profile headline read, "Eli Rogers, Chief Operating Officer, Connors Consulting Group." Her first laugh came then, small, genuine, startled by its own existence. It was brief, sharp, and hollow in the quiet room. Then she exhaled, shaking her head. Unbelievable. The absurdity almost softened the fury. Almost. A soft knock broke the silence. Rhonda stood at the door, holding a thick folder pressed to her chest. "You got Deshawn's packet?" Linda nodded. "I did. And it's worse than we thought." Rhonda stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "I figured. I've been drafting the final documentation. Compliance, fraud escalation, full external disclosure. I just need your sign-off before we send it to the auditors." Linda gestured toward the desk. "Let's review." They spent the next hour combing through each finding line by line. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly as Rhonda read aloud the legal phrasing for the report. Unauthorized third-party contracting, misuse of intellectual property, falsification of time records, and misrepresentation of title and credentials. When she finished, she glanced up. "This goes to the external auditors today. By Monday, state regulators will be notified." "Are you sure you want to go that far? There's no pulling it back after this." Linda didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said quietly. "They buried us in dishonesty. It's time they learn how deep we can dig, too. Rhonda nodded. Then we'll finalize the report. It'll be on record by close of business. Linda closed her laptop and leaned back, watching the city sharpen under the full daylight. Below, the employees moved like tiny currents, heads down, purposeful, steady. The machine she'd built was still running, still intact. That was all that mattered. She turned toward Rhonda. Once you file the report, send Deshaun a copy. He deserves to see the result of his work. Rhonda smiled faintly. He'll be glad to know he's not the only one still loyal to the old way. Linda's lips softened. The old way still works, she said. Honesty ages better than ambition. When Rhonda left, Linda remained for a moment, fingers tracing the edge of the side hustles folder. The morning light had turned the city's towers into silver spears, piercing through the faint haze. Her computer pinged with a new message, Deshaun again. Just one line this time. Check the public LinkedIn feed. Looks like Brad's already trying to spin the story. Linda clicked the link. There he was, her former son-in-law, posting a long, indignant paragraph about betrayal, about false accusations, about how the real innovators get punished by those afraid of change. Thousands of impressions already. Linda read every word, then smiled, not bitterly, but knowingly. Let him, she whispered. He's only tightening the rope. The morning sun cut through the glass atrium like a blade, sharp and golden, slicing across rows of chairs that had been hastily arranged overnight. The Connors Consulting logo gleamed above the stage, blue and steel, unbothered by the tension humming through the crowd. By 8:55 a.m., nearly every employee had filled the open space, murmuring quietly beneath the rising hum of fluorescent lights. The company hadn't seen a full-staff town hall in years, not since Linda Connors had retired. The announcement, sent late the night before, had been simple. No subject line flourish, no agenda attached. Just town hall. 9 a.m., mandatory attendance. Now, the anticipation thickened the air like humidity before a storm. Near the front, a few mid-level managers whispered about the firings earlier in the week. Others checked Slack threads or scrolled through social media, where Brad Coleman's self-pitying post had already drawn a few sympathetic comments. But most eyes kept darting toward the entrance, waiting to see if he would appear. He didn't. At exactly 9:00, the glass doors opened. Linda stepped out first, followed by Deshaun Lee and Rhonda Vega. Linda was dressed in slate gray, understated but immaculate, her hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck. The only sound was the rhythmic click of her heels against the marble floor. She paused at the podium, setting down a folder so thin it seemed almost ceremonial. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady, resonant against the open atrium. "Thank you all for being here on short notice." The crowd quieted instantly. Phones lowered. Even the HVAC hum seemed to fade. Linda let the silence hold for a moment before she continued. "Over the past week, several internal reviews have uncovered serious violations within our leadership ranks. Some of you may have noticed absences. Those absences are permanent." A ripple moved through the employees, soft gasps, exchanged glances, the sound of whispered names. Linda didn't flinch. This company was founded on 3 things: integrity, innovation, and accountability. Those words are not ornamental, they're promises. And some of those promises were broken. She rested her hands lightly on the podium. Effective immediately, there will be a complete leadership restructuring. Every head in the room lifted. Even from the far back rows, people leaned forward. Vendor relations and strategic partnerships will be temporarily dissolved, Linda continued. All open accounts will transition to operations for audit. Our compliance and HR teams will work jointly under new authority to rebuild our reporting framework. She paused, letting that sink in. That authority will come from a name most of you already know. Her eyes found Deshaun in the front row. He met her gaze, hesitant, as if unsure whether he should stand. Effective today, Linda said clearly, Deshaun Lee is appointed Acting Chief Executive Officer of Connors Consulting. The words hit the air like a spark. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Then came the sound of applause. It started small, uncertain, then grew until it filled the atrium in a wave. Hands clapped. People stood, some even cheered. Deshaun looked momentarily stunned, his normally reserved expression cracking into something between pride and disbelief. He turned slightly toward Linda, who gave him a small, approving nod. She continued once the noise settled. Deshaun has been here since our first 5-person office on Lemon Avenue. He's led with quiet precision and loyalty, and he's earned this trust 10 times over. This transition is about returning to what made this company strong: discipline, transparency, and unity. Her words carried a measured calm, but the meaning behind them was surgical. This wasn't just an announcement. It was a reclamation. Linda scanned the crowd, meeting eyes deliberately. I know the last few days have been difficult. You've heard rumors. You've read posts online. You deserve clarity, and you'll have it. But what you will not have, ever again, is a company run by arrogance instead of integrity. The applause came again, louder this time, more confident. Some of the older employees nodded to each other, relief etched across their faces. For them, this felt like the company's pulse returning. At the far back of the atrium, a figure lingered in the doorway. Emily. She wasn't part of the company anymore, not officially, but she'd slipped in quietly, dressed in jeans and a simple white blouse, her hair still slightly damp as if she'd left home in a rush. Her eyes found her mother on the stage. Linda saw her too. For a brief, silent moment, neither moved. The applause filled the space between them, carrying everything that words couldn't. Emily's hands trembled as she lifted them together, joining in the applause that echoed across the marble. But her eyes glistened, tears gathering faster than she could blink them away. Linda didn't break stride. "Before I close," she said, her voice steady again, "I want to make something clear. Leadership isn't a title. It's a responsibility to serve, not to be served. Those who forget that will always find themselves replaced by those who remember." The employees erupted again. Deshaun rose to speak briefly, thanking her, his voice warm and humble. Linda stepped back, letting him take the spotlight. It was his time now, and she wanted everyone to see it. As the applause faded into conversation, Linda glanced once more toward the back. Emily was gone. The door she'd stood by now hung slightly ajar, letting in a bright sliver of sunlight that cut across the floor like a dividing line. By Saturday morning, Dallas had gone gray. A low cloud ceiling hung over the skyline, dulling the light that usually poured into Linda's kitchen. She sat at the breakfast table, untouched coffee cooling beside her tablet. A half-folded copy of the Dallas Business Journal sprawled open. The front-page headline didn't name names, but anyone who knew Connors Consulting could read between the lines. Tech firm undergoes leadership overhaul after internal audit. Her phone buzzed once against the wood. "Emily, we need to talk." Linda looked at the message, the blue bubble glowing faintly against the dim light of the room. The words hung there, simple and soft, but beneath them, she could feel the weight of everything her daughter wasn't saying: the disappointment, the confusion, the pain of watching a marriage implode in public. She locked the screen. Across the table, her tablet flickered as a news alert came through. Connors Consulting names, acting CEO following ethics scandal. She reached for her mug, found it cold and set it back down. A second vibration. "Emily, please, Mom, just 5 minutes." Linda exhaled slowly, thumb hovering over the reply icon, then drifting away. She couldn't yet. Not while Emily was still tethered to him by anger and denial. The wound was too fresh. She'd learned long ago that truth didn't need to rush, it just needed to wait. She pushed the phone aside and rose to refill her mug. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, an ordinary rhythm for an extraordinary week. Then, another buzz. This one wasn't from Emily. A notification from Instagram. Brad's account. She almost ignored it, but the preview line stopped her cold. Brad Coleman. Backstabbed by blood. Funny how loyalty dies when money's involved. The post was a photo of his old office view, the downtown skyline through glass, but cropped to make it look like exile. His caption dripped with self-pity, wrapped in vague philosophy. The comments beneath it were predictable. Sympathy from people too far away to know better. A handful of speculative emojis, and one angry defense from a username Linda didn't recognize. M. Coleman, 34. Her stomach tightened. Emily had commented. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. Instead, she powered the phone off and placed it face down. Let him perform. Let her daughter defend him if she must. Truth didn't require applause. By late morning, she'd settled into her home office, reading through the forwarded summary Rhonda had sent overnight. Legal updates, compliance status, pending closures. Deshaun had already signed his new CEO contract. Everything was steady. The machine was intact. The phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. She let it ring twice before reading the preview. Travis M. My lawyer's drafting papers. You and your audit won't survive discovery. A pause. Then another text, barely a minute later. Travis M. Unless you want to make this go away quietly. Linda smiled, the kind of slow, amused smile she used to reserve for inexperienced negotiators who underestimated her in conference calls. She typed nothing. Instead, she forwarded the number to Rhonda with a single note. Release everything. Not 5 minutes later, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Rhonda. Rhonda. Done. Legal just sent his file to his attorney. Expense reports, payroll fraud, everything. Linda's smile deepened. That'll quiet him. And it did. Travis never messaged again. But the silence didn't last. Another text appeared, this one from Eli. Eli Rogers. Hey, Ms. Connors, no hard feelings, right? Just business. We cool? Linda stared at the words. The audacity was almost artful. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just the false casual tone of someone who thought proximity could erase consequence. She blocked the number without responding. The afternoon stretched on quietly. Rain began tapping against the kitchen windows. Soft at first, then steadier. An unhurried percussion against the glass. Linda stood watching it for a long time, the reflection of her house blending with the gray beyond. For the first time all week, she allowed herself to breathe. Not victory, not vindication, just breath. Her phone, face down again, buzzed once more. She didn't reach for it this time. She already knew who it was. The vibration stopped, then started again, persistent, pleading. When it finally fell silent, she turned the screen over. Emily. He's talking about suing. Can we please fix this before it ruins him completely? Linda traced a thumb across the glass, pausing on her daughter's name. Her reflection ghosted across the screen, tired, composed, unyielding. She whispered to the empty kitchen, He's already ruined, sweetheart. I'm just the one sweeping up the pieces. Then she locked the phone again, sliding it into the drawer beside her keys. Outside, thunder rolled low across the skyline, and somewhere in the distance a siren wailed faintly, another Dallas morning swallowing another storm. By Monday morning, the storm had turned digital. Every news outlet that touched business, leadership, or tech had caught the scent of scandal. Some wrote cautiously about corporate restructuring. Others were less kind, describing a family implosion at the top of Connor's Consulting. Most quoted Brad Coleman's bitter online statements, half-truths dressed as grievances. Linda read none of them in full. She'd skim the headlines, absorb the tone, and then close the browser. Truth, she reminded herself, didn't need her to chase it. It simply needed her to hold still long enough for it to rise to the surface. Still, the requests came. Calls, emails, messages from journalists who wanted her side. Most were easy to ignore, but one stood out. A message from Karen Holt, senior editor at the Leadership Ledger. The subject line was short and measured. Integrity at scale. Exclusive interview offer. Linda had read Holt's work for years. She wasn't sensational, and she didn't pander. If there was one person who could understand what this moment truly meant, it was her. She agreed, under conditions. No mention of Brad's name, no speculation about family, and no photos inside her home. The conversation would center on values, not vengeance. They met that Thursday afternoon in a private suite at the Thompson Hotel. The space was quiet, all warm tones and muted jazz, the kind of place built for confidential deals and whispered truths. Karen arrived exactly on time, notebook in hand, her demeanor polite but alert. She shook Linda's hand firmly. "You know you could have spoken to anyone," she said. "Why me?" Linda smiled faintly. "Because you'll print what matters, not what sells." Karen's pen paused. "And what matters to you now?" Linda folded her hands on the table. "That people understand leadership isn't power. It's stewardship. I spent decades building something honest. Somewhere along the line, people confused ethics with weakness." Karen nodded, jotting notes in shorthand. "So, this isn't just about accountability, it's about culture." "It always was," Linda replied. "I built this company to prove that you could lead with values and still win. But power attracts people who see morality as optional." Her eyes drifted toward the window, where downtown shimmered through the glass. "The truth is, I don't regret firing anyone. I regret trusting too easily." For an hour they spoke, about business, ethics, the cost of integrity. Not once did Linda mention names. She didn't need to. Every pause, every careful phrase spoke volumes. When Karen asked about forgiveness, Linda hesitated only briefly. "Forgiveness isn't free," she said finally. "It's earned through acknowledgement, not apologies." When the interview ended, Karen closed her notebook slowly, as if reluctant to leave the gravity of the moment. "You realize," she said softly, "this might define your legacy." Linda smiled. "It already has." 2 weeks later, the article dropped. Linda Connors and the Ethics of Enough. It wasn't sensational, it was surgical. Elegant, clear, devastating in its restraint. The piece detailed her philosophy, her decisions, and her quiet war against complacency. It didn't name Brad or his associates, but it didn't have to. Every reader understood. The article went viral within hours. Corporate blogs reposted excerpts. HR directors quoted her lines on LinkedIn. Even leadership podcasts devoted episodes to her interview, dissecting her calm defiance. She wasn't trending for scandal, she was trending for standards. By Friday afternoon, her inbox was flooded with invitations to panels, advisory boards, mentorship programs. But one email from the National Business Ethics Conference stood out. "We'd be honored to have you deliver the keynote address this year. Theme: Rebuilding Trust in Modern Leadership." Linda read it twice before replying with a simple yes. That evening, a delivery arrived at her home, an arrangement of white lilies and pale blue irises, her favorites. The card was unsigned except for 2 words written in Deshawn's steady hand: "Still the Queen." She laughed quietly to herself, placing the vase on her kitchen counter. It was strange how life could burn down in one season and bloom again in the next. She looked out her window at the Dallas skyline, evening lights flickering on across the buildings she'd helped populate with careers, contracts, and second chances. Her phone vibrated on the counter. An unknown number. Local. She considered ignoring it, but something in her gut said otherwise. She answered. "Ms. Connors?" A male voice said, steady but urgent. "This is Detective Harmon with DPD's Financial Crimes Unit. We're reaching out regarding your former employee, Brad Coleman. We think you'll want to hear what we found." Linda's hand tightened around the phone. "Go on," she said quietly. The following Tuesday dawned bright but brittle. A thin sunlight cutting through a sky so clear it looked scraped clean. Linda sat in her office, blinds half drawn, the faint hum of the city filtering through. The desk before her was orderly, almost ceremonial. At the center lay the final audit report from legal, printed, bound, and stamped with the Connors Consulting watermark. She'd been expecting it, but even after weeks of revelations, she felt the weight of it as she opened the first page. The names appeared quickly, bolded and unmistakable. Brad Coleman, Travis Mayfield, Eli Rogers. Each one trailed a list of violations like a scar: false expense claims, falsified invoices, unauthorized bonuses, and duplicate payroll submissions. She turned the pages slowly, methodically, as if touching each truth might dull its sting. When she reached the financial summary, the numbers spoke for themselves. Nearly $400,000 in fraudulent disbursements, drained over 3 years, disguised in project budgets and performance bonuses, money stolen from the company she'd built out of midnight deadlines and cold coffee. A quiet knock broke her concentration. "Come in," she said. Rhonda entered, file folders in her arms and tension in her shoulders. "It's official," she said, setting the stack beside the report. Legals filed the complaint with the Texas State Board of Business Oversight. Payroll fraud, misappropriation, falsified vendor data, the whole package. Linda nodded, not looking up. "And the system access?" Rhonda's mouth curved into something between satisfaction and disbelief. "Shut off 10 minutes ago. All logins suspended. They're locked out of everything. Email, cloud storage, internal servers." "Good," Linda said softly. "Make sure IT wipes their laptops by end of day." Rhonda lingered. "You sure you're ready for what happens next? Once the state picks this up, it won't be quiet. There'll be investigations, maybe subpoenas. Brad's already spinning stories online." Linda turned the page in the report, the rustle of paper as calm as her voice. "Then let him spin. The truth doesn't care about his performance." Rhonda exhaled, nodded once, and left the office without another word. When the door closed, Linda leaned back, letting her gaze drift toward the skyline. Dallas glittered beyond the glass, steady, indifferent, humming with the same energy that had carried her through the last 40 years. But beneath that steady calm, something in her chest ached. It wasn't victory she felt. It was the strange, hollow quiet that comes after a long war ends. The phone on her desk buzzed. "Emily." Linda hesitated, then answered. Her daughter's voice came through immediately, breathless, anxious. "Mom, I just heard from Brad's attorney. He says they're freezing his accounts, his payroll benefits, everything. You can't—" "I didn't freeze anything," Linda interrupted gently. "The state did. Legal followed protocol." "Mom, please," Emily said, her voice breaking at the edges. "You've made your point. He's lost his job, his reputation. What more do you want? Can't you just give him a grace period? Let him sort this out before you ruin what's left?" Linda's fingers tapped lightly against the desk, the sound almost like a heartbeat. "A grace period?" she repeated, her tone even. "He had 3 years of it, Emily. Every month he took money that didn't belong to him was a grace period. Every time he laughed in a meeting while pretending to work was a grace period. He's out of them. Silence stretched between them, fragile and heavy. When Emily finally spoke, her voice was small. You don't understand. He's scared. He says you're doing this to destroy him. Linda closed the report and looked out the window again. I'm not destroying him, she said quietly. I'm simply refusing to protect him. Her daughter said nothing. The line hummed softly, then disconnected. Linda set the phone down and rose, walking to the window. Below, the streets shimmered with afternoon light, cars threading through traffic like veins through a living city. Somewhere among them, Brad was no doubt telling another story. One where he was the victim, where she was the villain. Let him. Behind her, a soft ping from her computer broke the quiet. She turned back and opened the email marked confidential, state acknowledgement of complaint. It was official now. The regulators had accepted the filing. The investigation was active. For a long moment, she stared at the message, her reflection faintly visible in the screen, older, sharper, but resolute. She had wanted closure. This was the beginning of it. Her office door opened again without a knock. Deshaun stood there, jacket in hand, his expression unreadable. Bad timing? He asked. Never, she said. He stepped inside, glancing at the open report. I just came from legal. It's moving faster than expected. The board wants a closed session tomorrow. They're asking if you'll stay on through the review. Linda smiled faintly. Tell them I'm not going anywhere until the truth is filed, stamped, and paid for. Deshaun nodded, then hesitated. You know, for someone who said she was done working, you've had quite a quarter. She laughed softly. Retirement's overrated. As he left, the phone on her desk buzzed again, a voicemail alert this time. She pressed play. Brad's voice filled the room, low and desperate. You think you've won, Linda? You think money's all you can take from me? You got no idea what's coming. 3 weeks later, Dallas was wrapped in the slow burn of early summer. The air shimmered above the streets, the skyline gleaming under the weight of its own heat. Inside Connors Consulting's boardroom, the temperature was cooler, controlled, deliberate, the hum of the AC blending with the quiet rustle of papers and the low murmur of executives taking their seats. Linda stood at the window, her reflection sharp against the glass. Behind her, the board prepared to cast its votes, though the outcome was already certain. Deshaun entered last, calm and steady, carrying a worn leather binder tucked under his arm. He looked as he always did, collected, grounded. But his eyes carried the faint disbelief of a man realizing his name was about to be engraved in brass. Rhonda cleared her throat, from the far end of the table. All members present? She asked. All present, someone confirmed. Linda turned from the window, her voice even. Then let's proceed. The vote took less than 5 minutes. When it was done, the chair of the governance committee rose to his feet, smiling broadly. It's unanimous, he said, effective immediately. Deshaun Lee is appointed Chief Executive Officer of Connors Consulting Group. Applause followed, polite at first, then genuine. Deshaun shook Linda's hand, his grip firm, his gratitude unspoken but clear. You built this, he said softly. I'm just going to keep it clean. Linda smiled. Then we've both done our jobs. She sat back as the meeting carried on, her thoughts drifting, not backward but outward, toward the ripples that had spread beyond the company's walls. Because while the company was healing, the others were unraveling. Brad Coleman's name had become radioactive. Every recruiter in Dallas had heard the story, how he'd been fired for misconduct, how state regulators had filed charges. Some versions were exaggerated, others understated, but all of them ended the same. No one would hire him. He sent out resumes to every mid-tier firm in Texas, then to smaller consultancies, then to startups desperate for talent. Weeks passed, and silence grew louder. The only calls he got were from journalists fishing for quotes, and one podcast producer offering to let him tell his side for exposure. He didn't take it. Not yet. Emily told him to be patient, but her voice had lost its conviction. By the third week, she had stopped correcting him when he ranted about Linda's revenge campaign. She'd stopped defending him online, too. The apartment they shared in Uptown felt smaller every day. On a sweltering Wednesday afternoon, he came home to find her suitcase by the door. "I'm going to stay with Claire for a bit," she said quietly. "Just until things settle." Brad laughed bitterly. "So, what? Space? That's what we're calling it?" Emily's eyes were red, her voice steady. "No, Brad, that's what I'm giving you. The space to realize what you did." He didn't answer. She kissed him on the cheek like someone saying goodbye to a stranger and walked out. Across town, Travis sat in the gray waiting room of a Texas workforce office, sweat dampening the back of his dress shirt. When his number was called, he stepped up to the counter with a stack of papers. "Unemployment claim for Travis Mayfield," he said. The clerk typed for a few seconds, then frowned. "You were terminated for cause fraud, according to your employer's report. That disqualifies you from unemployment benefits." Travis blinked. "Fraud? That's not... There's gotta be a mistake." The clerk's tone didn't change. "You can appeal, but the documentation is extensive. You'll get a notice in the mail." He walked out into the parking lot, the Texas heat pressing down like punishment. His car's AC didn't work. Eli Rogers didn't even make it to a desk interview. When Uber's HR system scanned his resume and flagged his previous misconduct report, the rejection came instantly. He saw the notification pop up as he was uploading his driver's license. The irony was unbearable. He couldn't even get approved to drive people around. He shut his laptop and stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above his couch. "We cool?" He'd once texted Linda. Now the only thing cool was the silence. Back at Connors Consulting, the office had shifted into something that felt alive again. Employees laughed in hallways. Clients returned. Even the energy on the floor felt different, lighter, honest. Linda spent her mornings mentoring the next generation, holding open coffee hours where junior analysts could ask questions without hierarchy hanging over them. One afternoon, she found an envelope in her mailbox. No return address, just her name in careful handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a note from a young intern she'd mentored years earlier. "You once told me integrity isn't a career move, it's a compass. I never forgot that. Thank you for showing me that doing the right thing is its own kind of success." She read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in her desk drawer beside her first business license. Outside her office, Deshawn walked by, stopping at the doorway. "You okay?" Linda smiled. "Better than okay. This place finally feels like itself again." He nodded, slipping his hands into his pockets. "The board wants a press release. They're calling this the new era." "Let them," she said. "Just make sure they spell your name right." Deshawn chuckled, started to leave, then turned back. "You know, I was thinking, we should restore the Founder's Wall. There's a blank spot beside your plaque." Linda raised an eyebrow. "Who are you adding?" He smiled. "The team that rebuilt this place after the storm." She laughed softly. "Then make the wall big enough." When he left, Linda stood at the window again. The sun was lower now, the light warmer, wrapping the city in a forgiving glow. Her phone buzzed once, a message from Emily. "Emily, I moved out. He's still blaming you, but I'm starting to see it wasn't your fault." Linda exhaled, slow and steady. For the first time in months, the sound didn't echo. By late summer, Connors Consulting had found its rhythm again, The tension that once haunted the halls had dissolved into the steady cadence of progress, the clicking of keyboards, the soft hum of conversation, the renewed pulse of purpose. From her office on the top floor, Linda could see it all. The quiet competence of a company that had remembered who it was. She was no longer CEO. Deshawn had settled comfortably into that role, steering the ship with measured confidence. But Linda remained where she'd always belonged, at the helm of values, not operations. Her title was still etched on the office directory: Linda Connors, chair of the board, mentor in residence. She'd laughed the first time she saw that second part, mentor in residence. It sounded like a ceremonial title, something polite but distant. Yet over the months, it had become her favorite part of the job. Every Wednesday morning, she led ethics sessions for new hires. Small groups gathered in the glass-walled conference room, coffee cups in hand, notebooks open, expressions curious and cautious. She didn't lecture. She told stories, real ones. Ethics isn't a list of rules, she would tell them, pacing slowly at the head of the table. It's a habit, a discipline. The moment you stop exercising it, you start losing it. Sometimes they'd ask about the scandal, about the firings, about the son-in-law whose name no one dared to mention. She never answered directly. She didn't need to. The lesson lived in the silence between sentences. Afterward, they'd linger, young analysts and interns who reminded her of herself decades ago, still idealistic enough to believe that integrity could coexist with ambition. She fed that belief carefully, like an ember she refused to let die. On the first Friday of every month, she hosted a lunch in the atrium, a series she'd started quietly called Women Who Built It. It wasn't about titles or corporate hierarchies. It was about survival, about grit, about the women who'd clawed their way through boardrooms full of doubt and left the doors open behind them. The first event drew a handful of curious faces. By the third, the tables were full. Linda would sit at the center, listening more than speaking, laughing when someone shared a story that mirrored one of her own. "This company used to be my whole identity," she admitted once, smiling faintly at the group. "Now it's just a reflection of what I believed in. That's better. Healthier." After each luncheon, she'd walk the floor, stopping to chat with employees, people who no longer looked at her with the mix of awe and fear that once defined her reputation. They greeted her like an elder stateswoman, someone who'd earned the right to stay without needing to prove why. On a quiet afternoon in early September, Linda was finishing paperwork when her assistant poked her head into the office. "Ms. Connors, you have a visitor?" Linda looked up. "Who?" Her assistant hesitated, then said softly, "Your daughter." Emily stood in the doorway a moment later, hands clasped, her face calm but fragile. It had been months since the town hall, weeks since the last text. She looked older somehow, more grounded, less angry. "Hey, Mom," she said quietly. "Hey," Linda replied, her voice equally soft. They didn't say much after that. Words weren't what either of them needed. Emily stepped forward, and Linda rose from her chair. The hug was brief but fierce, the kind that compressed years of tension into a single fragile truce. When they pulled apart, Emily managed a small smile. "You look happy?" she said. Linda's eyes softened. "I am," she said simply. Emily nodded. "Good. You deserve that." Then she left, promising to call, and this time, Linda believed her. That evening, long after the building emptied, Linda stayed behind. The office lights cast a soft glow across the polished wood of the boardroom table. She pulled out her checkbook, a relic she still preferred over online transfers, and began to write. The name on the payee line was deliberate: the Connors Foundation for Women in Leadership. In the memo she wrote, "Scholarship Fund for the ones who don't get second chances." When she signed her name, her hand didn't tremble. The ink flowed steady, her signature precise. She tore the check from the book and placed it in an envelope, sealing it with the same quiet satisfaction that had followed her every decisive act. Standing, she crossed to the window. Dallas sprawled below, glittering, relentless, alive. She had given it her ambition, her patience, her strength. Now she was giving it her legacy. Her phone buzzed softly against the desk. A message from Deshawn. Board approved the foundation. Press release goes out tomorrow. You've started something big again. Linda smiled, setting the phone down. Not started, she murmured. Just continued. The view from the top floor had always been Linda's compass. Morning light spilled through the glass, walls stretching across the boardroom table, turning the grain of walnut into gold. The Dallas skyline shimmered beyond it, steel and glass rising into a cloudless blue, a city that never really stopped working. Linda Connors stood at the head of the table, her hands resting lightly on the chair that used to be hers. For a moment, she just breathed it in, the sound of quiet productivity echoing faintly from below, the life she had built still pulsing through every floor. The company was no longer hers to run, not technically. Deshawn's name now graced the CEO's office door, his leadership steady and transparent. But this view, this space, this legacy, it was still hers to protect. Titles could change. Ownership didn't have to. Near the entrance to the boardroom hung her newly unveiled portrait, the one the staff had surprised her with during the town hall the week before. The painting was striking. Not the glossy, airbrushed image of a corporate founder, but something more grounded. Her expression was calm but unyielding, her eyes reflecting that precise blend of patience and fire that had always unsettled her rivals. Across the bottom of the brass plate beneath it, a simple inscription read, Linda Connors, founder, builder, standard bearer. She'd tried to argue against it, of course. Too much, she'd said. But Deshawn had insisted, and the applause that followed the unveiling had silenced her objections. Now, as she stood before it, she didn't feel pride so much as peace. Every trial, every betrayal, every battle fought behind glass walls, it had all led to this. A company that no longer needed her to function, but still carried her fingerprint in every corner. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass of the frame. She adjusted her blazer and smiled at herself, just barely. Behind her, footsteps approached. Light ones, hesitant. Ms. Connors? She turned to see a young woman, barely mid-20s, clutching a notepad against her chest, nerves stitched into every word. Her ID badge read, Avery T., intern, strategy division. Hi, Avery said quickly, cheeks coloring. Sorry to interrupt. I didn't think you'd still be here. I tend to linger, Linda said, her tone warm but teasing. Old habits. Avery smiled, her eyes flicking toward the portrait. I just walked past that. The painting. It's beautiful. Linda glanced back at it. They were kind to me, she said softly. Avery hesitated, then asked, You really started all this, didn't you? The question wasn't naive, it was reverent. Linda looked around the room. The sleek boardroom table, the city's reflection shimmering across the glass, the faint hum of conversation drifting up from below. She thought of late nights when the company had been just an idea, of the people who had stayed loyal, and of those who hadn't. I did, she said finally, her voice steady. And I never stopped. Building it. Avery smiled, tucking her notepad under her arm. That's inspiring. I hope I can do something like that one day. Linda studied her for a moment. Bright eyes, sharp mind, the kind of confidence still learning its edges. You will, she said. Just remember what I tell everyone. Protect your standards like they're oxygen. The moment you let someone else define them, you start running out of air. Avery nodded, almost solemn. Yes, ma'am. Linda gave a small smile, And stop calling me ma'am. It makes me sound retired. That earned a laugh, light and genuine, before the young woman excused herself and disappeared down the hall. Linda turned back to the window, the city still alive below her. She could see hints of motion reflected in the glass, teams moving between conference rooms, interns heading toward elevators, people doing honest work in a place built on restored trust. Her phone buzzed on the table, vibrating softly against the polished wood. She picked it up, the screen lighting her face. A message from Deshawn. Just wrapped the quarterly call. Record numbers across every department. You built the bones, I'm just keeping them strong. Thank you. Again. Linda felt a quiet warmth spread through her chest. She typed only 2 words in reply. Keep building. Setting the phone down, she crossed to the far end of the boardroom, flipping off the recessed lights one by one. The city's glow filled the room in their place, painting the space in soft shades of gold and silver. She paused at the doorway, her hand resting briefly on the light switch, her reflection faint against the glass wall. Older now, yes, but unmistakably herself. The portrait near the entrance caught the last of the daylight, its surface gleaming as if alive. Linda glanced at it once more, and for the first time she didn't feel the need to compare the woman in the painting to the one she had become. They were the same. She stepped out, the sound of her heels echoing through the empty corridor. With one final look toward the skyline she'd spent a lifetime earning, Linda turned off the last light and closed the door herself.